The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, its envelope thick and cream-colored, sealed with a wax crest Arthur hadn't seen in over 20 years. He stared at it for a long while before breaking the seal. "My dear Penrose," it began in that familiar slanted hand. "I imagine you'll be surprised to hear from me after all this time. I'm gathering a few old faces at Greystone Manor this weekend, nothing grand, just a small reunion of sorts. I should like to see you again, old friend. Yours, Henry Faulkner." Arthur Penrose set the letter down beside his untouched cup of tea. The name alone brought back a flood of memories: the sound of gunfire in the rain, a shared flask of brandy in a darkened trench, and a promise made in the middle of chaos. Henry Faulkner had been a captain then, clever, reckless, and impossibly charming. After the war, Penrose had gone into the police, working his way up to inspector before retiring 5 years ago. Henry, as far as Arthur had heard, had gone into shipping and made a fortune. Now, 2 decades later, Henry was calling on his old comrades. Arthur couldn't help but feel a tug of curiosity and perhaps something else. The years had been quiet lately, too quiet for a man used to puzzles. By Friday afternoon, his small suitcase was packed and he was on the train heading south toward the coast. The countryside rolled by misty fields, scattered cottages, the faint outline of the sea in the distance. The taxi driver dropped him at the gates of Greystone Manor just as the sky began to darken. The manor stood high above the cliffs, an enormous stone house with ivy creeping across its walls and chimneys that twisted like sentinels against the clouds. A butler, tall and stiff, opened the door. "Mr. Penrose, I presume. Welcome to Greystone. Captain Faulkner has been expecting you." Inside, the manor smelled of wood smoke and polish. The entry hall was lined with oil portraits, stern men in uniforms, women in pearls. Penrose was shown into a drawing room where a fire crackled in the hearth. "Arthur." A voice rang out, deeper now, but still unmistakable. Henry Faulkner crossed the room with outstretched hands. His once black hair was silver, but the spark in his eyes hadn't faded. "Good heavens, it is you. You haven't changed a bit." Penrose smiled. "Flattery, Henry. You always were a terrible liar." They both laughed, and for a moment the years fell away. Dash dash. As the evening went on, other guests arrived. There were 6 of them in total, not counting Henry and his young wife, Evelyn. There was Major Lionel Briggs, another old soldier, still with the posture of a parade ground general. Dr. Frederick Collins, quiet and bespectacled, who had been the unit's medic. Miss Agnes Vale, Henry's cousin, a sharp-eyed woman of 60 with a habit of listening more than speaking. And lastly, Mr. Oliver Trent, a financial advisor from London, who seemed entirely too sleek for the rugged company of war veterans. Evelyn Faulkner was perhaps half her husband's age, graceful, poised, and with that sort of fragile beauty that made men lower their voices when speaking to her. She greeted Arthur with polite warmth but kept glancing toward the clock on the mantel. Dinner was served in a long oak-paneled room lit by candles. The conversation flowed easily at first: stories from the war, talk of old comrades, gentle teasing about who had lost the most hair. Yet beneath the laughter, Penrose sensed an undercurrent. Small things, the way Evelyn's smile stiffened whenever Henry mentioned business, or how Agnes Vale's eyes lingered too long on a locked cabinet in the corner. When dessert was cleared, Henry rose to his feet, raising his glass. "To old friends," he said. "And to unfinished business finally laid to rest." There was a pause, a flicker of something unspoken in his tone. Evelyn's hand trembled slightly as she set down her wine glass. Outside, thunder rolled over the sea. Dash dash. Later that night, Penrose found himself in the library, unable to sleep. The rain lashed the windows, the house creaked, and somewhere a clock struck midnight. He poured himself a small glass of brandy and settled into an armchair near the fire. It was then he heard the voices low, urgent, coming from the corridor beyond the door. "Henry, you promised me." It was Evelyn's voice, strained. "And I've told you, it's not that simple," Henry replied. "There are papers you don't understand. I can't simply." The rest was drowned by a sudden crash of thunder. Penrose frowned, listening. But the voices moved away, and the silence returned. He waited a while, then sighed, finishing his drink. It wasn't his business. Not yet, anyway. The next morning, Greystone was wrapped in fog. The storm had knocked out the telephone lines, and the staff were busy checking for damage. Breakfast was subdued. Evelyn appeared pale and distracted. Henry, on the other hand, was in high spirits. "I've something to show you all after breakfast," he announced. "A bit of news that may surprise you." But before he could elaborate, the butler entered, his face white as linen. "Sir. I'm terribly sorry, but..." He stopped, swallowed. "It's Mr. Trent, sir. He's been found in the garden. I'm afraid he's dead." For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the ticking of the clock. "Dead?" Henry repeated, incredulous. "What on earth are you talking about?" The butler hesitated. "It appears he fell from the terrace during the storm. The cliff edge, it's quite steep there." Henry's face tightened. "Show me." The group followed him out into the damp morning air. The fog hung thick over the cliffs, and the grass was slick beneath their feet. There, just beyond the terrace, lay the crumpled body of Oliver Trent, his coat torn, his head twisted at an unnatural angle. Dr. Collins knelt beside him, checking for a pulse, though the effort was clearly futile. "He's been dead for hours," he murmured, "probably since sometime after midnight." Penrose crouched beside the body, his mind already clicking into motion. The man's shoes were clean, too clean for someone who had supposedly slipped in the mud. And there, near the path, something glimmered faintly, a small brass cuff link, shaped like a falcon. He picked it up, turning it in his fingers. Henry Faulkner noticed. "That's one of mine," he said slowly. Penrose met his eyes. "Indeed." The wind carried the sound of the sea below, cold, relentless. And for the first time in many years, Arthur Penrose felt the familiar stir of purpose. For the next hour, the house stood in uneasy silence. No one spoke much. The servants moved about in hushed tones, whispering near doorways. Outside, the fog clung to the cliffs like a shroud, and the distant crash of the sea sounded almost like the murmur of voices. Arthur Penrose stood at the terrace rail, hands deep in his coat pockets. Below him, the rocks were dark with moisture, jagged teeth rising from the surf. A man could easily slip there in the storm, yes, but why would Oliver Trent have gone out at all, in such weather, and alone behind him? Henry Faulkner's voice broke the silence. "Terrible business. Poor Trent, such a capable fellow." Penrose turned. "You knew him well?" Henry hesitated. "For about a year. He handled some investments for me. Brilliant with figures, though lately, I'd begun to wonder if he hadn't overextended himself." "Overextended?" Henry shrugged. "Speculative business. Risky deals. I warned him, but he had a gambler's streak. Penrose studied the older man's face. And last night you said you had an announcement to make this morning. Ah, yes. I meant to tell everyone that Trent was leaving the firm under mutual agreement. But it hardly seems relevant now. Perhaps not, said Penrose quietly. But it might be important. Henry gave a weary sigh. You think this was no accident? Penrose looked out toward the sea. I think it's far too early to say. But something about it doesn't sit right. After the body was moved to the small chapel at the edge of the property, the household gathered in the drawing room. Evelyn Faulkner sat near the window, pale and trembling slightly. Major Briggs stood by the fireplace, his arms folded, while Agnes Vale busied herself with embroidery, or rather, appeared to. Dr. Collins poured himself a brandy. It's a dreadful shock, he said. But surely the man went out for air during the storm and slipped. We've all done foolish things after a drink or two. Henry nodded, grateful for the support. Exactly. Let us not make a mystery of it. Penrose, seated opposite, said nothing. His eyes were fixed on Evelyn. She hadn't spoken since the discovery, but her fingers twisted a handkerchief until it looked ready to tear. Mrs. Faulkner, he said gently, did you see Mr. Trent after dinner? She startled a little. I know. I went upstairs early. The storm gave me a dreadful headache. Agnes Vale looked up from her embroidery. You were still awake when I passed your door after midnight. Evelyn's cheeks flushed. Yes. I couldn't sleep. The thunder. The air in the room thickened. Henry cleared his throat loudly. Really, Agnes, must we pry into everyone's sleeping habits? But Penrose's attention had shifted. Major Briggs, he said. You were in the army with Captain Faulkner, I believe. Briggs straightened. I was, yes. And proud of it? Did you know Mr. Trent before this weekend? Briggs frowned. No. Though I knew his type. Too smooth, if you ask me. The sort who'd sell your boots while he was shining them. Did he quarrel with anyone last night? Briggs hesitated. He and Henry exchanged a few words over cards. Nothing serious. Trent accused Henry of hiding an ace. Henry laughed it off. But later, I heard voices in the corridor, loud ones. Couldn't he say who they were? Penrose nodded slowly. Thank you. Henry's smile was tight. Arthur, old man, I can see what you're doing. But this is a private matter. No police, no scandal. Trent's death was an accident, and I intend to keep it that way. Penrose regarded him evenly. You invited me here as a friend, Henry. But I'm still a detective at heart. If this was an accident, then no harm will come from asking a few questions. And if it wasn't, he let the rest hang in the air. By afternoon, the fog began to lift. The local constable finally arrived, a round, slow-speaking man named Hobbs who looked both awed and irritated by the grandeur of the manor. After hearing the details, he rubbed his chin and said, Tragic, that. I'll file the report as an accident unless there's cause otherwise. Penrose walked with him to the garden, pointing out the details. See here, Hobbs, the soil's dry under these footprints. But it poured last night. These were made after the storm. The constable squinted. So someone came out here this morning. Or moved the body, said Penrose. Hobbs blinked. Moved it? Penrose straightened. Tell me, Where was the body first seen, at the edge there or lower down? Hobbs scratched his head. Can't rightly say. The butler found him and fetched Captain Faulkner. By the time I came, he'd already been carried up. Penrose sighed. I thought so. Something about all this smelled wrong, the tidy footprints, the misplaced cuff link, and that look on Evelyn's face at breakfast, like someone who'd seen something she wasn't meant to. That evening, the mood was even heavier. Dinner was served, but few ate. The rain had returned, beating against the windows in steady rhythm. Evelyn excused herself early again, while Henry sat at the table nursing his drink, staring into the fire. Penrose joined him after a while. You said this Trent handled your finances. Was he in trouble? Henry's jaw tightened. He was being blackmailed. Penrose raised an eyebrow. By whom? That's what I was trying to find out. He hinted that someone here in this house was involved. That's why I called everyone together. I meant to confront him privately this morning. But now. Penrose leaned forward. Blackmail can make a man desperate or dangerous. What was it about? Henry hesitated, then lowered his voice. During the war, there were shipments. Not everything went through official channels. Trent found out about it somehow, said he had documents proving it. Claimed I owed him a favor. So you did owe him. Henry slammed his glass down. Damn it, Arthur, we all did things in the war we weren't proud of. But I didn't kill him. I didn't say you did, said Penrose evenly. But someone wanted those documents silenced. Later that night, as the storm howled once more, Penrose wandered the halls. The lamps flickered in the wind, somewhere a shutter banged loose. The manor, ancient and vast, seemed almost alive, whispering secrets through its walls. He paused near the study door. A faint light glowed beneath it. Slowly, he turned the handle. Inside, Evelyn Faulkner stood at her husband's desk, rifling through drawers. She froze when she saw him. Mr. Penrose. I thought everyone was asleep. Looking for something, he asked softly. She swallowed. No. I was just. He stepped closer. Perhaps the same thing Mr. Trent was looking for. Her face went pale. You don't understand. Then help me to. She glanced toward the door, then whispered, there are letters, papers Henry kept from the war. They could ruin him if they ever came to light. Trent found out and demanded money. Henry refused. Last night they argued. I heard them. But when I went downstairs later, the corridor was empty. Empty. Yes. I thought he'd gone to bed. I never imagined. Her voice broke. Penrose studied her closely. And the letters. She opened her hand. In it lay a small brass key. They're locked in that cabinet. Henry doesn't know I took this. Penrose stared at the key, the faint glimmer of the firelight dancing on its surface. Mrs. Faulkner, he said, I believe you've just given me the motive for murder. The rain had stopped by morning, but a grey mist still clung to the cliffs like smoke. Breakfast was served in uneasy silence, chairs scraped softly, cups rattled faintly, and no one dared speak above a murmur. Henry Faulkner sat at the head of the table, his expression blank. Evelyn, pale as the china she held, barely touched her food. Major Briggs devoured his eggs like a man unaware of tension, though his eyes flicked often toward the captain. Arthur Penrose ate little. His thoughts were elsewhere, on the key in Evelyn's trembling hand, on Trent's two clean shoes, and on the faint smell of tobacco he'd noticed in the corridor outside Henry's study the night before. None of it fit together. Not yet. When breakfast ended, he followed Henry into the library. "Henry," he began, closing the door behind him, "I must ask, where are the documents Trent used to blackmail you?" Henry turned sharply. "What documents? Don't play coy. Your wife knows about them." For a moment, the older man's mask slipped. Then he sighed and went to the cabinet by the window, the very one Evelyn had mentioned. "They're in here. Letters, invoices, signed reports. Proof that I made a small fortune smuggling materials during the war. And you kept them." "I couldn't destroy them," Henry said bitterly. "They were my insurance. Against men who might have done worse." He opened the drawer and froze. The papers were gone. Penrose stepped closer. "When did you last open this?" "Last week." "Who else knew of the key?" "No one." Henry stopped. "Except Evelyn." They looked at each other, understanding passing silently between them. By noon, the tension in the house had thickened like fog. Agnes Vale sat in the parlor knitting, her needles clicking like distant clockwork. "A gloomy business," she murmured to Penrose as he passed. "Mark my words, there'll be another tragedy before the week's out." He didn't reply, but her words stuck with him. When he reached the corridor, he caught sight of Dr. Collins coming from the study, looking flustered. "Doctor," Penrose said quietly, "you've been busy this morning." Collins blinked behind his spectacles. "Just checking on Mrs. Faulkner. She's quite distressed." "Understandably. Tell me, did you happen to treat Mr. Trent for anything last night?" The doctor hesitated. "He asked for aspirin before retiring. I gave him a dose from my case." "Anyone else handle that case?" "No." "Why do you ask?" Penrose looked thoughtful. "Because the man was dead within hours, and I suspect it wasn't the fall that killed him." Collins went pale. "You think he was poisoned?" "Possibly. There was a faint discoloration at the corners of his mouth. I noticed it this morning before you moved the body." The doctor's hands trembled slightly. "I'll examine him again. But if you're right..." Penrose nodded grimly. "Then we have a murderer among us." That afternoon, the constable returned, grumbling about the rough road. Penrose asked that the body not be removed just yet for a private inspection, he said. In the small chapel, the detective leaned over Trent's lifeless form as Collins prepared his instruments. "Look here," Penrose pointed. "The lips bluish tinge. And under the nails slight staining." Collins bent closer. "It could be cyanide." "Indeed," said Penrose. "Which would explain why the body looked oddly composed, as though death came before the fall. But who had access to such poison?" Penrose straightened. "Anyone with a bit of medical knowledge. Or a locked cabinet and a key that's gone missing." When he returned to the manor, the household was gathered again. Henry stood by the fire, tense and pacing. Evelyn was nowhere to be seen. Penrose spoke calmly. "I must ask you all to remain in the house. Until further notice, no one leaves Greystone." Major Briggs bristled. "On whose authority, Penrose? You're not the law." "No," said Penrose evenly, "but I was the law once. And I know murder when I see it." Agnes Vale's knitting paused mid-stitch. "Murder?" "Yes," said Penrose. "Mr. Trent was poisoned before he fell." The fall was staged after death. A collective gasp filled the room. Henry turned ashen. Good God. Penrose's gaze swept across them. Someone here killed him, perhaps to silence him, perhaps for those missing papers. Until I know who, we treat this house as a crime scene. At that moment, Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her face white. Arthur, she said softly, you'd better come upstairs. In the master bedroom, the air was heavy with the scent of lavender and brandy. On the writing desk lay an envelope, addressed to Mrs. Evelyn Faulkner. Henry followed them in, his expression tightening as he saw it. What's that? Evelyn's voice trembled. It was under the door when I came in. It's Trent's handwriting. Penrose took it and unfolded the letter carefully. Evelyn, if anything happens to me, know that I tried to make things right. The captain is not who he seems. I have proof, hidden in the old chapel chest. Do what you must. O.T. Penrose looked up sharply. The chapel chest. Henry swore under his breath. That damned man, even from the grave he torments me. He strode for the door, but Penrose blocked his way. No. We'll go together. The chapel was dark and cold, its stained glass windows dim beneath the gray sky. Dust motes floated in the thin light. At the front stood a heavy oak chest, carved with the Faulkner crest. Henry knelt and threw back the lid. Inside were old prayer books, candles, and beneath them a flat parcel wrapped in oilskin. He tore it open. Inside were several faded letters, stamped confidential. Penrose picked one up, reading quickly. Shipping manifests. False names. Dates matching your military postings. Henry, this is evidence of illegal arms transport. Henry's face hardened. Yes. I did it. We all did, back then. The war demanded it. But someone kept the proof, said Penrose quietly. And used it to bleed you dry. Henry turned away, gripping the edge of the chest. If only I'd destroyed it sooner. A faint sound broke the stillness, the creak of a floorboard behind them. Penrose spun around. In the doorway stood Major Briggs, his revolver leveled. Don't move, Briggs said. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned. Step away from the papers. Henry stared. Lionel, what the devil? Save your breath, said Briggs. You ruined men's lives for profit while they bled in the mud. Trent found out, and I helped him. He wanted money, I wanted justice. Penrose's tone was icy. You poisoned him. Briggs hesitated. He lost his nerve. Said he'd go to the police. I couldn't let that happen, not before you paid for what you did. And now, said Penrose quietly. Briggs's hand shook slightly. Now I'll take those papers and finish what I started. Penrose took a slow step forward. You won't get far, Lionel. The fog's lifted, and the constable's still on the grounds. For a moment, the soldier's jaw clenched, then, with a sharp motion, he turned the gun toward the fireplace mantel and fired. The bullet struck the stone, sparks flying. He dropped the weapon and bolted out the side door into the mist. After him! Henry shouted. But by the time they reached the garden, Briggs was gone, swallowed by the sea fog that rolled back in like a living thing. Hours later, as the house settled into uneasy quiet, Penrose sat alone in the library, the papers spread before him. The storm outside had begun again, wind howling against the shutters. Evelyn entered softly. Is it over? Penrose looked up. Not yet. Men like Briggs don't run far. But what's done is done, and some truths, Mrs. Faulkner, can't stay buried forever. She lowered her eyes. What will you do with the papers? Penrose folded them neatly. Turn them over to the authorities. The past can't be erased, but it can be accounted for. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant and deep as if the sea itself approved. But somewhere, in that same rolling fog, a figure moved along the cliff's edge, coat whipping in the wind, eyes fixed on the manor lights above. Major Briggs was not finished yet. For the first time since the storm began, the wind had calmed. A thin grey light slipped through the cracks in the curtains, falling on the remnants of the long, grim night. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 7. Inspector Collins had barely slept. His face looked drawn, but his eyes were alert and sharp. Around the dining table sat everyone who remained at Wycliffe Hall: Richard Wycliffe, pale and grim, Father Mallory, silently fingering his rosary, Margaret, looking hollow and older by years, and the maid, Elsie, clutching a handkerchief like a lifeline. The inspector placed a leather notebook on the table and spoke in a tone that cut through the silence. Before I name the killer, he said, I must tell you something rather uncomfortable. This was never a random act. Every piece of it was planned years ago. Richard stirred. Years. Yes. I found an old letter in Sir Edward's desk, Collins said, producing a folded parchment. It was dated June 1916 from the trenches in France. Signed by a man named Arthur Wycliffe. Richard stiffened. My uncle. He died during the war. So we thought, said the inspector quietly. But this letter suggests otherwise. He wrote of betrayal by his own brother, Edward. Something about stolen money meant for the troops. The letter ends with a promise, if I live, I will come back for what's mine. A murmur ran through the room. Margaret pressed a trembling hand to her chest. But Arthur never returned, said Richard weakly. Collins gave him a long look. Did he not? He turned toward Father Mallory. You knew the truth, didn't you, Father? The priest froze, his lips tightening. I knew that Edward carried guilt, he murmured. But I believed it was spiritual, not criminal. Collins' gaze shifted. Arthur didn't he die in the war? He changed his name. He lived quietly until recently. The missing servant, Henry, was not who he claimed to be. His real name was Henry Arthurson. Richard's voice cracked. Arthurson. Arthur's son, Collins said softly. He came to this house not as a servant but as an avenger. A gasp escaped Margaret. Then, he killed Edward. Yes. He believed Sir Edward had destroyed his father. He poisoned him during the toast the brandy bottle had been tampered with earlier in the day. Richard's eyes widened. And Henry himself, why did he die? Collins sighed. Because the past eats its own. Edward discovered Henry's identity and switched the glasses. Henry drank the poison meant for Edward. But Edward, already ill, collapsed later that night. A double tragedy, born of old lies. There was a long silence. The only sound was the slow ticking of the clock. Margaret whispered, so, no one is left to punish. Collins closed his notebook. The guilty are gone. But truth itself was the last to die here. He rose from the table and walked toward the tall windows. The rain had stopped completely. The dawn mist rose from the fields like ghosts fading into daylight. Behind him, Richard spoke in a low voice. Inspector, What will become of Wycliffe Hall? Collins turned, his expression unreadable. That depends on you, Mr. Wycliffe. You can let it stand as a monument to grief or rebuild it as a place for peace. The choice belongs to the living. He walked to the doorway, paused, and glanced back once more. Good day to you all. And with that, he stepped out into the cold morning, lighting a cigarette as he went. The grey smoke curled into the damp air, carrying with it the last secrets of Wycliffe Hall. Hours later, when the police cars had gone and silence returned, Margaret wandered into the drawing room. On the mantelpiece, the brandy glasses still stood, two of them, side by side. She lifted one, hesitated, then set it down again. "Here's to peace," she whispered to the empty room. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds. The crows had flown.